So the story that I want to share with you today is about my grandmother. She was one of the last people that I came out to, despite the fact that I had a very close relationship with her. I loved her very dearly, and I guess that's probably what made it that much more difficult to come out to her, because I wasn't sure how she was going to react. I came out really late to my friends and my family. I was 29. By the time I had the confidence in myself to admit that I was gay and to admit that that was what my life was going to be, and that I couldn't be anything else than who I am. But I'd come out to my parents, and I'd come out to my friends and the rest of my family, and they loved us for who they loved me for who I was, and they loved Chris for who he was and what he contributed to my life. But coming out to Nan was difficult. My mum was anxious about me coming out to Nan because she thought that the news could kill her. So, despite the fact that I had a relationship with my Nan, she really didn't know who I was. She didn't know that I had love in my life. She didn't know that I was happy as I was, and as content as I was. She would frequently ask me, are you dating a girl yet? And of course the answer to that was no. Because there was another person in the room, usually, and that person was Chris, and I couldn't tell her that I was in a loving, committed, beautiful relationship with him. For her 80th birthday, I promised to take her to Sweden. She had done an enormous amount of research pre-internet days on our family tree and discovered that we had quite a strong heritage in Sweden. And it was one of her life dreams to travel and walk on the cobblestones of our forefathers. And so for her 80th birthday, I promised that I would take her. And so I did. And Chris, because she wasn't to know that he was the love of my life and that one of the most beautiful partners anyone could imagine having, we took her. Chris was my flatmate officially, and we worked very hard for the entire trip to make sure that she wasn't aware that we were in our relationship. So for 6 weeks we had to pretend to be friends. And that was fine. My flatmate carried my grandmother's bags and sometimes carried my grandmother through Europe. But still, he was just my flatmate to my grandma. It all came to a head because my mum writes Christmas letters to our friends and family every year. There's 180 letters that go about all over the country and overseas as well. And I have the joy of editing this letter for Mum to turn it into something pretty before she sends it out. And because I'd come out to Mum and Dad years beforehand, it meant that every Christmas, when this Christmas letter was sent to me, it was a bit of a stab in the heart, because it would always say Diane, Ian and Ivan. And in our Christmas letter, our family Christmas letter, there would be no reference to Chris. There would be the celebrations and the vicissitudes of Diane, Ian and Ivan, but Chris wouldn't be there. And the only reason why he wasn't, it wasn't because Mum and Dad had a problem with Chris. They loved him like another son, and they love him like another son. It was because Mum was anxious about Nan and how she would cope. And at a point, when I got the draft, and it said Diane, Ian and Ivan, it kind of broke. It kind of broke me. And there was no malice in it. It was just symbolic of the fact that I still couldn't be who I wanted to be, despite the fact that everyone knew. except Nan. And I called Mum and I said, look, how long is it going to be for me to appear to our friends and family as a failed heterosexual when I have love, a good job, but love? And Mum explained to me that her concern was Nan. And it wasn't anything else. It was just a daughter's concern for her mother's well-being. She was terrified of how a woman in her 80s with limited education would take the news. Particularly for the fact that my Nan was socially conservative, very socially conservative. She actually had an official title, or maybe an unofficial title in One Nation as a seat warmer for Pauline Hanson. So in Pauline's first iteration in politics, my Nan and her friends would go to events that Pauline wasn't invited to as they were preparing for the event. And they would sit in the seats that were directly behind the VIP seats. And they would sit there for hours and they would knit. And they would talk about the world and all of the things wrong with it. And when the event would take place and all of the seats would fill up around Nan and her friends, there would be a moment where Pauline would arrive, and my Nan and her friends would pack up their knitting and silently walk to the aisle and pass Pauline without making eye contact and go home. And Pauline would assume their seats as if she was a VIP. And that's how close my Nan was to that sort of intolerance. The first thing that my Nan said to Chris when she first met him, and this is years before this critical moment, after she said hello and she was buttering some sayos for our lunch, she turned to Chris, and honestly, this is the second thing that she said to him directly, other than hello. She said, "We're getting on okay, aren't we?" And Chris was kind of confused by that question, and he said, "Well, yeah, I guess so." And she said, because you see, Chris is Australian, Malaysian, Chinese. She said to Chris, "It's not that we've got anything against you. It's just that we've got enough of you here now." So yeah, Nan struggles with a modern Australia. And it's clear that she was going to have problems, possibly, with Chris being part of our family. But when I had this argument with Mum, because it was an argument, and I said, I need to be authentic with Nan. I need to have a complete relationship with her as a grandson. Because as I said, we're very close. But there was this chasm, this void of information that she wasn't able to enjoy. And we weren't able to share. And it got tense. And my mum is a beautiful person. And she was only motivated by compassion and fear. She called me selfish. And she hung up on me. She doesn't remember this, but I can understand why, because she was very scared. And with that, I was furious. I went inside, grabbed the keys of the car, forgot to lock the house, jumped in the car and headed to Sydney, where Nan lives. I called Chris on the way and apologised for forgetting to lock the house and said I'm not coming back until I'm out to Nan. And so I went to Sydney, didn't pack a bag, and I spent 2 days with her trying to find that segue, trying to find that moment where I could pass seamlessly from one conversation to, Nan, I'm gay. And I couldn't do it. There is no segue. I had her up for all hours of the day and night trying to find that segue, because she loved our conversations. We talked about all sorts of things, including politics. On the second night, it was past midnight, and I realized that I just needed to get it done. And I was terrified. But I thought the best way to share the news with her wasn't to tell her that I was gay, but to tell her that I have love, because it's something that she can relate to. So I said, Nan, I have someone in my life. I love them with all my heart, and I want to be with them for the rest of my life. And I want you to know who it is. There was silence, and she was just looking at me. She said, "Who is it?" And I said, "It's Chris." And then there was a really long silence. And I thought to myself, it's taken 2 days to get to this point. Years, in fact. And I finally come out to my grandma, and I didn't check that she had her hearing aids in. I was afraid I was going to have to come out to her again. And after this ridiculously long silence, because I didn't know what to do, the first thing that came out of my nan's mouth after me coming out to her was she said, "You know, when we were travelling through Europe, I thought I sensed the love." Within 12 months, Chris and I had a commitment ceremony. Because finally, we could have all of our friends and family around us to celebrate our relationship, including Nan. And the most beautiful thing about that, other than the fact that we were able to celebrate our relationship together, is that Nan was our celebrant. It was Nan, Pauline Hanson's seat warmer. The person who told Chris that we have enough of him, that joined us together for the rest of our lives with joy and love and respect. Nan's passed away now. And we had a few really, really wonderful years together where I could be myself. We could be part of the family. And so when Nan passed away, I wanted to give her eulogy. Because I felt something special about my Nan. And I wanted to share it. Because I didn't feel grief. I didn't feel loss with the passing of Nan. I felt grateful. I felt joy that we were able to celebrate ourselves with each other, that she knew me completely, that she loved me completely, from my birth to her death. And so at her eulogy, I told the group, which was my family, her friends, that while they grieve, I'm just grateful. Because what defined my grandmother wasn't intolerance, wasn't intractable fear, but absolute love that overcame any form of prejudice, that overcame any form of ignorance in an instant. Because that was my Nan.